The Boys is a show that I'd heard of. I wasn't sure if I wanted to watch it. It seemed like it had an interesting premise, but I was on YouTube the other day. I was watching an alcoholic who I very much admire, the Critical Drinker. He's absolutely hilarious, Scottish guy. And he's kind of known for just bashing pretty much anything. Not anything, but most of the people that go to his channel want to watch him make fun of stuff. I'm no exception. So every once in a while, he'll actually recommend something that he likes. And The Boys was one of those shows. And since I was already interested in the premise, and I've never seen it before, had not seen a single episode of it before the day of this podcast being recorded, I thought it was a good place to start. So I pulled it up on Amazon. I watched the first episode, took a few notes, and this is the result of that. Let's do the spoiler-free review first. So this is if you want to go in completely spoiler-free. Should you watch The Boys? My answer, hell yes. I think it's absolutely hilarious. I think it's a great show. I've only seen the first episode, but the first episode has me completely hooked. I really didn't want to come here and record this podcast. I really just wanted to keep watching the rest of the season, but I didn't want to do that before I actually recorded. I didn't want to forget everything from the first episode. So here I am. That's my first review. Should you watch it? Definitely. Let's go into the review where I actually talk about the first episode. So again, this is spoilers for the first episode of The Boys. I'm not going to be spoiling anything from the other episodes because I haven't seen the other episodes. So you'll be good on that front. So the first thing, I guess let's go over what the show's about. Like in a word, what's the premise? So the premise becomes a little clearer after the first 15 minutes or so. But basically the premise, and I've got it here in my document, in my own words, this is not necessarily the IMDb description, but premise, what if superheroes were dickheads protected by massive corporations and free to step on the little guy? The way that I've thought about it as a premise, and the way that it sort of makes sense to me, is I watched another different YouTube channel. I don't even remember who it was. This was forever ago. I'll find the video and put it in the description, but it was talking about the superhero movie Logan, which was the last Wolverine movie, until they inevitably reboot it, starring the little girl or starring someone else besides Hugh Jackman, who I'm sure just wants to sing and dance and be left alone and not asked to punch people anymore. But the video was talking about sort of the life cycle and the rise and the fall of different genres, and talked about the comparison between the current mythos of the superhero movie compared to the westerns of the 60s, and how the two genres are really pretty similar when you think about it. It's about bad guy comes to town, good guy comes to town, good guy and bad guy face off, good guy wins, mythos prevails, and everybody goes home happy. Those are the very simple westerns, and those are the very simple superhero comic book movies. There's not necessarily anything wrong with it. It's formulaic, but formulas work. So I don't think formulaic is necessarily a good enough insult on its own, but they are predictable. You know what's going to happen. It's all about good triumphing over evil. You get 90-minute to 2-hour runtime. You know what you're going to get. Simple. And the movie, or rather the video that whatever channel it was did, I really wish I could remember. It was the Closer Look or some other channel. Again, it'll be in the show notes, description, whatever. But the thing that he talked about was the metamorphosis of genres over time, and how I think that one of the things that he talked about was that right now we're reaching one of those metamorphosis points with the superhero genre. I know there were superhero movies since the early 2000s. I mean, I know there were probably some before that, but the early 2000s was when the X-Men stuff started. Those are pretty popular, but I think we can all really agree that the superhero boom really started in 2008. That's when it became super mainstream, when Iron Man came out. That's when the MCU started. That's when it sort of really hit its critical mass point. So I know there was stuff before that, but we'll take 2008 as the starting point, quote unquote. And we're now in 2019, 11 years later. Iron Man's dead. Captain America's basically dead. And the genre has become somewhat predictable and somewhat stale. And this is coming from someone who loves Marvel movies, by the way. I love watching Marvel movies. I love talking about Marvel movies. But I think that even the diehard fans can agree that to some extent after Infinity War and after Endgame, it's like, okay, where does this go from here? Where do superheroes go from this point on? And I think the answer is movies like Deadpool, really tries to subvert there's a term for it in the video. I really should have watched the video before this, but that's my bad. But there's a term for the subversion of the genre tropes that Deadpool does, like when the bad guy does the superhero landing on like the one knee and the one, I don't know, leg. That's not a good description, but you know what I'm talking about. You've seen it a million times, where they land and it breaks the pavement and Deadpool's like, ooh, that's really bad for your legs. And it's like, haha, I've seen them do that before, and now he's making fun of it. It's the subversion of the tropes of the genre. It's funny, it's entertaining. Deadpool's great. But it's also, at the same time, it's somewhat of a one-trick pony, because really comes down to making fun of the established rules of superhero movies in Deadpool's case. Or if it was like Blazing, if you want to go back to Westerns, talk about like Mel Brooks' Blazing Saddles, it's just ultimately mocking, not that it's easy and not that it's not engaging or funny or entertaining, but it's relatively easy to understand and it's relatively simple. And that was like the first step maybe that superhero movies took. Deadpool was a real departure from the norm. It was something really different that we haven't really seen before. And it was engaging, it was funny. And then once that happens, I think Logan was in 2017. But basically Logan, if you haven't seen it, it's about Wolverine, and he's, as Hugh Jackman still, and he's old, he's beaten up. Like one of the first scenes, or maybe the first scene in the movie, is he's in like Mexico or somewhere, and some thugs come up to his car, and they're like either like hitting his car or they're doing something to piss him off, and he like fights these thugs and gets shot and like cuts off a few of their arms. Really just proves that Wolverine really should have been a rated R hero from the very beginning, because you get to see blood when he actually cuts someone. It's not like he slices them and then it cuts away to a different thing, because there's no real non-violent way for you to cut through someone with knives that come out of your hands. But anyways, it's a different discussion for a different time. But he shows up and he cuts through these guys, and it's like these guys are below your pay grade, Wolverine. What are you doing? Like, these guys do not matter. Why are you killing them? Why are you... I mean, I know they started it, but like, it'd be like Superman killing bank robbers or something. It's like, you don't have to do this. It's beneath you. But you go to find out that he's old. He's not as strong as he used to. He's not healing as much as he used to. Basically, he's dying. And the whole movie deals with the concept of the death of the superhero. And it deals with, again, these are not all my own insights. These come from the video that I'm talking about. It was a really interesting video. But it deals with the demythologization of the superhero, of them becoming human. And then I think that where all this comes back to is, when I was watching The Boys, to me it really felt like another step in that metamorphosis of the superhero genre. To me, you watch it and it asks it takes superheroes almost to their like logical conclusion, if you want to put it that way. Because let's say that superheroes are real. They're not going to just be these people that show up and shoot lasers out of their eyes and save the day and then go fly off into the sunset, because at the end of the day, they're human. I think back to like the Greek gods and how they were like so human, and they would just, I mean, I'm saying they as if like, oh, they were just goofing around like they were fucking real, but you know what I mean? Like, the Greek gods were very human. They had unearthly powers. They could create and destroy things at will, but their flaws were still very human, and they were still petty, they were still jealous, they still craved things like power. They were not just these divine good beings. And they also weren't these just completely evil beings, there was, I mean, I guess some of them probably were, but there was always a balance with them. They were sometimes good and they were sometimes evil. They were sometimes helpful and sometimes harmful. Sometimes they did things for their own personal gain. Sometimes they didn't. There was a lot of depth to them, and I think that that's really where superheroes are going to go next. And not that the Marvel movies don't have that. Each of the Marvel heroes is flawed in their own way. And I don't mean to sound like I'm picking on Marvel or anything, because again, Marvel fan, but it's not quite the same as like in Marvel movies, there are only heroes and villains. There aren't really any like bad heroes. There's a few times where it happens, like when Hawkeye goes on his killing spree in the beginning of Endgame because he's bitter that his family got snapped and that there's still good people or still bad people that didn't get snapped. So I mean, like, sometimes heroes do bad things, but we were never really concerned about whether or not Hawkeye was gonna like turn over and just be evil, except for when he got controlled by Loki. But with the boys, it really feels like they're asking, what if superheroes were just really human and were tempted by all the same things as normal people? And not only that, but it also asks, how do they operate within a human bureaucracy? Which is something that, again, Marvel movies touched on, but it never really got super explored. How do these superheroes really, really, really live in the modern world? What does that look like for them? And the way that it's imagined in The Boys is that there are these superhero agencies and that they basically are just run like giant corporations, and the heroes are treated like celebrities. They're like celebrities and astronauts and professional athletes all kind of mixed into one. They've got like red carpets. They do these events. They've got their own theme parks. They star in movies. They've got their own breakfast cereals. It's a really interesting look at what it would really be like if there were these godlike people living among us. They would be, ultimately, at the end of the day, deified in the same way that we deify celebrities and professional athletes and people of that nature. And I think it's a really smart way to look at the superhero genre and where to take it and push in a new direction that we haven't seen as much of before. It's actually kind of interesting because I've actually seen some things somewhat similar to The Boys, not necessarily the exact same, but similar in ways in a couple different Japanese shows that I've watched. One of them was One Punch Man, where it's all about the Hero Association and how each hero has rankings based on their power, but also based on their popularity, and it's important to politics so that you can get to where you want to be. And it really talks about some similar themes as The Boys, like what would it really be like to have all-encompassing power. It's an interesting show. And then there's also My Hero Academia, another Japanese show that also has hero agencies, very similar to the Boys. Neither of those shows is as bleak as where I imagine The Boys is going to go, and neither of those shows are as cynical either. But it's just interesting to see that parallel thinking from people who aren't even on the same continent, Like, okay, we've seen superheroes in these situations, we've seen them in these contexts. What if we push them into this context? What happens when we do that? And then following that along to its logical conclusion. It's really interesting stuff. And I think The Boys does it really well. But in the case of The Boys, which I said most cynical of the three shows for sure, all of the superheroes are just fucking raging sociopaths. I mean, they're all just awful. That we've got a surrogate for them in one of the main characters who's actually a new hero who hasn't been corrupted by the industry yet. But it's such an interesting premise, and it's been fleshed out really well. Like, one of the scenes in the first episode is the invisible hero, Translucent, being interviewed by Jimmy Fallon, and that's just what it is. And then one of the main characters is going through a convenience store, and he sees A-Train, which is like their equivalent of the Flash, A-Train, and he's got his own like beer, and he's got his own breakfast cereal, and like it's just on the shelves at the supermarket, it's our gas station, wherever the fuck he was. And it's those, now neither of those was subtle, but it's those details. It's very clear that the writer has a fully fleshed out, imagined grasp on the setting. And the setting, I think, is a good place for me to really start. Not that I haven't been going for the past 20 minutes or whatever. But I think that even more important in some ways than the characters is the setting that they inhabit. I think it's important as a writer to really know your setting super well. Know it like it's one of your characters that you love. You have to be fully aware of what happens in your setting, It's one thing to say that the show takes place in New York, which it does. It takes place in New York City for the most part. I'm sure with the superheroes that it's going to take place other places at some point, but probably the bulk of the show, at least in the first episode, it took place in New York. But it's not just New York that it takes place in. There's a bunch of different sub-settings. Like at one part, two of the characters go into a bar that's sort of shady looking, but then you go inside and it's super nice, and it's where all the superheroes are spending their time off because they can go there without getting paparazzi hounding them for everything. And they're just all sleazy. Like, they talk about one of the heroes being a gay basher, and then he's there making out with two other guys. It's stuff like that. It's like you can't write stuff like that without just really knowing where your story takes place and being really aware of that. So for the setting, I mean, they did a fantastic job. I think it's a really interesting setting. The setting and the premise are sort of tied together, and the world building is just really top notch. So it's the first thing that I think really will reel you in about the show, is because even at the very beginning, the very first scene is a parody of the Marvel intro that you see when you go and see the movies. It's got all the little videos of them, and then they all form together to be the one of the seven, which are the sort of like the Avengers. They've got their own watchtower in New York City. They're obviously meant to be the Avengers. One of them even says we're Earth's mightiest or something, because I don't think they can get away with saying Earth's mightiest heroes. But and that's really all that I've got. Let's talk about the characters. I think that the characters are definitely interesting. I don't know that any of them are things that I've never seen before. But I think that doesn't necessarily matter when the setting is done that well and the characters are all interesting in their own ways. You got your main character, Huey. He's basically this downtrodden guy that works in an electronics store. He's too afraid to ask his boss for a raise. He's sort of intimidated by the world. So, you've probably seen that character before, but I think he's interesting. I think he's well done. You've got Annie, also known as Starlight. She's the hero that I was talking about earlier, who is sort of our audience surrogate in the actual hero world. She becomes one of the members of the Seven, which are again, the Avengers. They're the big shots. They're the ones with $100 million sneaker deals and stuff like that. So they're really famous. They're really well known. She's this Midwestern girl that turns in an audition tape, and they end up hiring her to go be one of them. And she sort of sees firsthand the griminess of the superhero industry, up close, and we're meant to be disgusted by it as well. And trust me, you will be in the first episode. We got Butcher, who we'll talk about a little bit later, because he kind of ties into the plot spoilers a little bit. Translucent, that's the invisible guy, who is also the one that appears on Jimmy Fallon. Later you find out that he's a fucking creep and kind of a pervert, because he has to be naked when he uses his power, obviously, because his clothes don't also turn invisible. And he went into the restroom while Annie, aka Starlight, was crying in there. And the only reason that she found out, because he just goes in there completely silently and invisibly, and then one of the other heroes shows up, and she's like, quit being a fucking perv, Translucent, or something to that effect. And then he uninvisibles himself, revisibilizes. Is there a word for that? The act of going uninvisible? Revisibilizing? Is that it? I don't think that's right. But whatever. And then he stops being invisible and we're treated to some full frontal male nudity. So if that's the kind of thing that interests you, you're in luck, because there's a bit of it in the first episode. A-Train, Flash type character, runs really fast. He ties into the plot of the first episode pretty heavily. He's basically a spoiled child, an overgrown man-child. He whines about things. He clearly does not have a very mature mindset about being a hero. You kind of hate him right off the bat. There's the Deep, who is another interesting character. He's basically Aquaman in terms of his powers. He can breathe underwater and talk to fish. Sorry, did I say he's basically Aquaman? No, he's fucking Aquaman. Let's be real with ourselves. And he is also interesting because he comes across as like a friend to Annie at first. And then, not so much. But that we'll talk about that more in a little bit. Black Noir, I got nothing on this guy. He's like a ninja. From the review that I watched, apparently he doesn't talk, so, don't know what I can say about him. I'm interested how they'll make him like a character that doesn't talk, what they'll do with that, whether he's just going to be like a complete psychopath. I don't know. I don't want to put any like guesses out there because they're all kind of disturbing, but I'm curious how they're going to make a character that doesn't talk and wears a mask so you can't see their expressions. Scary, interesting, likable, charismatic. We'll have to see. It's going to be interesting. And then there's Queen Maeve, who's basically Wonder Woman. She even dresses like Gal Gadot in the Wonder Woman movie. And she has the same powers. And she, at first you think she's going to kind of be like the mentor figure to Starlight when she like is crying in the bathroom. And then she's like, clean yourself up. You can't let them see you cry. And then like leaves. and that's pretty much it. And you kind of get a good feel for her personality just based on that. Queen Maeve and Black Noir were barely in the first episode, so I don't really have much to say about them. But yeah, those are really all the major characters. There's of course some minor characters that don't really matter as much, but those are the 8 or 9 characters that it looks like we're going to be seeing a lot more of in the show. I'm really interested by the villainous heroes. All the heroes they've shown so far, with the exception of Starlight, who's like one of the main characters, they've been pretty fucking despicable so far. Like not even in like, oh, you take the good with the bad. Like they're all just sociopathic. Oh, I guess I didn't talk about Homelander, did I? Well, I should have talked about Homelander. Homelander's interesting. I'll wait to talk about him. Cool. I interrupted myself for nothing. But they're all you just kind of hate all of them. But they feel very human at the same time. They don't just feel like, a villain, like villains that are just indiscriminate forces of evil, or that they're like hell-bent on destroying the world, because they're not. They're heroes. Like, they do save people. They do it mostly for personal gain, but they do save people. They do help people. They presumably get people out of natural disasters and stop crimes, and they do all this good stuff. So it puts you as a viewer in an interesting position, because you do hate them. They are awful. But at the same time, you can't really deny that they do stuff that's good at the same time. So you can't just completely write them off and condemn them, despite their numerous character flaws. But they're the ones that really get me excited. I'm really excited to see how they react to things, because it's going to be interesting to find out how deep their characters actually go. Because right now they're all pretty flat, with the exception of maybe like Homelander, who we haven't seen much of in the first episode, but the few times that he's on screen are very interesting. And I haven't talked about him yet, because I'm going to talk about him when I talk about the plot a little bit more. But like one show that I think of is like, if you've watched Better Call Saul, which is a great show. If you haven't watched it, you need to watch it. I'll go over the pilot for that show someday. And maybe I'll do Breaking Bad at some point. I mean, I'll definitely do Breaking Bad at some point, but I don't know when. But in Better Call Saul, there's the character of Howard. And when you first meet him, he just looks like and acts like the prissiest, old money, white guy. Like, like you look into his eyes and then it feels like there's nothing looking back. And he just starts off as this completely one-dimensional character, kind of like if you've also watched Breaking Bad, Hank from Breaking Bad, who goes from this like boisterous brother-in-law character who looks like kind of an idiot, and then as the show progresses, you find out that he's one of the most interesting characters on it. And so I'm really hoping that's what they pull off with the villainous hero characters that they've created. As funny as it is to watch A-Train sulk like a child because the other heroes are getting better endorsement deals than he is, like, as funny as that is, I really hope that there's more to his character and more to his motivation. Same goes for all the other hero characters. It's really just going to depend on the execution from here on out, because I know that you can't show all those multifaceted layers of all the characters in the first episode. There's no way to do that. It's really just going to depend on where they go from here with the show. But from what I've seen so far, I'm really impressed, and I'm really hoping that they can pull off something interesting and impressive with the rest of the show. And right now, like I said, I have very high hopes. That's good for the characters. I know I skipped a couple, but that's because I wanted to get into the plot a little bit more. And the plotting, I thought it was well plotted. I thought it was pretty well paced as well. But basically, let's talk about from the beginning. So Huey, our main character, he's not a superhero. He's just a normal guy. Like I said, downtrodden, works at an electronics store, too scared to ask his boss for a raise. And his girlfriend shows up at the beginning, and she's like, all right, let's go to lunch. So the two of them go to lunch. They're holding hands. They're kind of talking to each other. And this is like, I knew it was coming because I'd watched the other review, but it's still like off. Like, it was almost worse that I knew it was coming. And this is where I'm going to get into major spoilers, obviously. So I'll give you like 3 seconds to get the fuck out if you haven't already. Okay, great. You're gone. But the two of them are like looking each other in the eyes, and then she's just gone. Like, she just vanishes. And then this like red liquid starts to like splash onto Huey's face, and then the camera pans over, and you see A-Train, the Flash character, standing like 30 paces down the street, covered in blood, and there's just blood everywhere. It's like she just exploded because A-Train ran through her and exploded her on impact. It's one of the most horrifying, like, dark things that I've seen in a while. It was just like, because it's like so ridiculous that you like almost want to laugh, but you're also so uncomfortable from it happening. Like, if you didn't know it was coming, because like I said, I knew it was coming, so I had this like horrible feeling of unease. But if you didn't know it was coming, which would have made you like maybe be more in Huey's shoes as to when it happened, because of course he was blindsided by it, because how can you be prepared for your long-term girlfriend to just explode in your arms? I don't think there's any amount of counseling in the world that can fully get you past that. But anyways, I digress. And A-Train's just like, oh god, I'm sorry, I gotta keep going, and he just runs away at like 600 miles an hour again. In writer speak, that's the inciting incident. That's where it all starts. Yeah, hilarious in the darkest way possible, really unsettling, really gross, memorable as hell. It was a really great opening for the show. I mean, it wasn't the first scene, but you know what I mean? Like, it was a great inciting incident. I loved it, even though it was awful and disturbing. But move forward a little bit later, he's just come back from his girlfriend Robin, that was her name. Huey's just come back from Robin's funeral, and a lawyer shows up from A-Train's agency. And this is right after, by the way, Huey saw A-Train on TV offering his deepest condolences. Never actually apologized, but he did offer his deepest condolences to the family of Robin, whatever her last name was. And then the lawyer shows up at that same moment from Vought, VOUGHT. That's the hero agency that, I don't remember if that's what they call them. I've been watching My Hero Academia. That's what they call them in that. I'm going to keep saying that even if that's not correct terminology for this show. So that's my bad. But the hero agency that A-Train works for. He shows a lawyer from that company shows up and basically asks Huey to sign a non-disclosure agreement in exchange for $45,000. So don't talk about this. Don't go to the media with what happened. A-Train also said that Robin had been standing in the middle of the street, and that was why, but she'd been standing right next to the curb, technically on the street, but like one step off the curb. So, he lied about that too. Huey was pissed. And so this lawyer tries to get him to sign that, and Huey goes into this daydream in his head about like yelling at this guy, demanding that he apologize, grabbing him by his shirt and throwing him out of the room. He like has all these thoughts and daydreams about it, and then it cuts back to reality, and the guys just asked him to sign it, and Huey's just like, oh, can you give me a few days to think about it? And then the lawyer leaves. So it gives you a really good insight into Huey's mental state. He's pissed as anyone would be. He's sad as anyone would be, but he's still not ready to stand up for himself quite yet. But he doesn't sign the form and take the check right away. So we at least know, and obviously because he's the main character, we know that there's something more there, but we know that he's not a complete coward. We know he's just sort of paralyzed right now. So the story moves forward a little bit. He is at work, and this guy who calls himself Butcher shows up, says that he's a Fed, works for the FBI, shows a badge, and then says that he knows what happened to Huey and that there's other people like him. Basically, he explains that superheroes cause hundreds of casualties every year as collateral damage, and most of it just gets completely hushed up because the world is a better place, allegedly, if people don't know how dangerous superheroes actually are and if they just let them be the beacons of hope that they want to be. Which is another interesting prospect and also probably pretty true, I think if you had these godlike humans running around and you knew how much mayhem they actually caused, it could very well incite mass panic and stuff like that. So I think it makes sense for the show's internal logic for, these superhero agencies to keep that sort of stuff quiet and to not let anyone know about it and to keep it quiet. It certainly makes sense from a bottom line perspective for them. But basically he lays out that he wants to enlist Huey's help in taking down the Seven and taking down the heroes, and shows him a video of A-Train like laughing about what happened to Huey's girlfriend Robin, like how he like accidentally swallowed one of her molars. Again, it's like the show's pretty good at walking the tightrope between just absolutely disturbing and horrifying, but like while also being funny in a really dark way. But that finally sort of kicks Huey into gear a little bit, and then Butcher tells him that he wants Huey to go demand an apology from A-Train in person, so he'll sign the NDA, but to plant a bug at the superhero tower while he's there, which is an interesting plot point. It doesn't necessarily hold up to a ton of scrutiny. I mean, he wants him to plant the bug in the big conference room that the superheroes meet at, kind of like the Justice League table. The one. Which, I mean, it's like, I get it. Like, I know that that's what the show needed to go for, but like, you don't have any guarantee that that's where they're going to meet. Like, they could meet and it's a giant skyscraper. They could meet in any one of 50 smaller conference rooms, but we'll overlook that very small nitpicky gripe, but still something that I was like, well, you don't know that's going to work. But, anyways, Huey's like, I'm not going to do that. I'm not James Bond. Fuck you, Butcher. And he leaves. And that's where he runs into Annie, who has had things happening to her this whole time that I skipped because I was talking about Huey. But her story's a lot shorter. Basically, she's a hero from Des Moines, Iowa. She turns in her audition tape to be a member of the Seven because one of their members is retiring. And so they're on like a nationwide hunt to replace that member of the Seven. She enters her name. She gets in because she tests well with Midwestern demographics, which is another thing that's hilarious about the show, is how they superheroes get polled for popularity, those polls get broken down into demographics like Caucasians think this, African Americans think this, Asians think this about these specific heroes, and how like black superheroes will be in primarily black cities and neighborhoods, and white superheroes will be primarily in white cities and neighborhoods. So very interesting, hilarious social commentary there. But anyways, she's the typical naive, wants to do the right thing in the world character. I'm sure you've seen her before, and this is where her resolve to maintain her own standards and self-respect really starts to take a blow as she enters this dirty superhero industry. But she ends up becoming the member of the Seven, obviously, because she's the main character. And so she goes on, like, does this press conference, and, like, there's tons of people screaming and cheering for her. And then she goes backstage with the Deep. He's not Aquaman. It's so silly of me. But she goes backstage with the Deep and back to the Stark Tower, whatever the fuck it's called, the Vought Tower. The one with the big, the one with the Justice League table. That one. You know what I'm talking about. They go back to that together. Her and the Deep. Her and Aquaman. Her and the Fish Boy. And they're talking, and he's like saying how he's got her back and how everyone feels like a fraud at first. You know, all this stuff, blah, blah, blah. She embarrassingly reveals that she used to have a poster of the Deep in her room as a kid. And then she turns around and his pants are off with his dick in his hand. And it's like one of those, again, shocking, horrifying, less funny, but like it's so shocking you almost want to laugh just out of pure shock. And he basically explains to her, not so subtly, that if she wants to stay in this industry, because he's the second most influential hero after Homelander, basically says that if you want to stay in this industry, you better, if you know what I mean. I'm not going to go into it with too much detail, but the next scene is her crying in the bathroom and throwing up, so you can only imagine what happens. And it's like, it's gross. It's not fun to watch, like, that particular part. It's not supposed to be fun to watch. It's supposed to make you feel the way that it made me feel. It's supposed to make you feel super uncomfortable, and it succeeds at that. And then that's when she meets Queen Maeve, and Queen Maeve tells her to stop crying, and then Queen Maeve also says, "Translucent, get out of here," and then the fully naked Invisible Man runs out of the room after he, of course, uninvisibles himself. But that's when that's when Annie feels the walls closing in on her a little bit. Like, everyone, I'm sure, can on some level relate to getting the thing that you wanted and then it not being everything that you thought it would be. I mean, you've seen that story a million times because it's an interesting one. It's a compelling one. Like I said, the characters are pretty archetypal. They're not anything that I think is completely new and original and things you've never seen before, not just because their powers are based on existing heroes, but I think that they work well together, and I think that they're interestingly executed. So again, that's not a huge gripe, but it's at this point, these two characters are at their lowest points when they happen to sit on the same park bench and start talking to each other, which for me, this was my least favorite part of the episode. Not because the writing was bad or anything, but I don't like that both of their, they talk about, like, she talks in vague terms about, like, I thought I was strong, I thought I was better than this, and then he sort of, like, gives her a pep talk and then ends up pep talking himself, and then they go their separate ways, both feeling emboldened. I was really looking for their stories to intersect a little bit more in the first episode when they were both established early on. It wasn't bad. Like I said, it wasn't badly written. It wasn't badly executed. I just am not a huge fan of the fact that it was only by a completely chance meeting that they ever met each other and got the will to, soldier on or whatever. It was also kind of weird that he didn't recognize who she was, because at this point his hatred of Huey's, I should say, hatred of superheroes is growing, and she's like just become the seventh member of the Seven, which is like the biggest superhero group in the world. I'm sure it would have been on all the major news publications, and her face would have been everywhere. So I was also like, really, you don't recognize her? Like, she's uber famous now. How would you not recognize her? How would you not have seen her anywhere before? I don't know. Maybe he just wasn't. Maybe it's like one of those things where he just wasn't like paying attention, and like you don't expect to see famous people on park benches. So I don't know. I that part's like fine. I just wasn't a huge fan of the whole random coincidence chance meeting thing as a way to move the plot forward. But hey, you only get an hour. You can only fit so much shit in. But that, as far as like plotting goes, that's really my only huge gripe. But it happened, whatever. And so Annie goes back, and she has her resolve restored by Huey, and she's gonna kick some ass basically and try to. I don't know what she's gonna do actually quite yet. We know she wants to be a force for good and save the world. We know that much about her. We don't know what she's going to do about the corrupt politics, because those are harder to fight than bad guys. I think that's going to probably be one of the central themes of the show, is like, you can fight bad guys all you want, but if you don't fight the corruption in your own system, then, what's it all amount to at the end of the day? But yeah, and then Huey goes ahead and follows the plan, puts the bug in the big conference room, but Translucent was being a pervert again, and he was naked in the bathroom, and he saw him drop the bug on the floor and then pick it back up. So Translucent knows what's up, and after Huey plants the bug, he follows him back to the electronics store afterwards, invisible of course, and throws the bug on the counter after coming in invisible. And like, it's interesting that he's like, as the Translucent is as mad as he is, he's like, "What are you, a spy? Are you a spy?" And he like starts screaming at Huey and like slamming his head against the table and stuff. And it's an interesting character moment, because it wasn't like he really knew or cared if Huey was a spy. It was like he was personally offended by the idea of someone trying to spy on, not even him specifically, just trying to spy on the Seven. It was like he took that as like a personal insult. It was a pretty interesting insight, because that's not the way that the military would handle finding out that somebody was a spy. They wouldn't they might do it as like an intimidation tactic, but they wouldn't just like in a blind rage. Some general wouldn't be like, "What are you, a spy? What are you, some kind of fucking spy? Huh, you piece of shit?" Like, that's not what would happen. They'd probably interrogate the person. It'd be methodical. They'd ask questions. I'm not saying it would be good, but I'm saying it was like, they wouldn't take it personally, and Translucent took it personally, which was very odd for him to do. But he takes it personally. This is right after the bug has been planted and Butcher dropped Huey back off at his electronics store and then drives away. And so it looks like, and Translucent picks up a giant TV from the wall of the electronics store, and it looks like he's going to crush Huey with it. And then Butcher comes back, Deus Ex Butcher, to save the day, drives through the wall of the electronics store, and just runs over Translucent, knocks him into the back wall with his car, grabs a crowbat, and he's ready to go beat up the Invisible Man. But as invisible people tend to do, he's moved by the time he gets there. By the time Butcher gets there, they have a fight scene. Translucent breaks Butcher's nose, and then Butcher spits blood on Translucent so that he can see where he actually is, which was, I thought, a really, cool, unique moment of ingenuity for them to show that even though Butcher's this blustery, guy with a New Zealand accent. I think he's from New Zealand in real life. I think that's what the Wikipedia said. But beneath all the bluster, he's actually got a working brain and he's actually thinking ahead. And then they end up electrocuting Translucent with the wires from where he had pulled off the TV. Huey comes back and electrocutes him because he'd seen on Jimmy Fallon earlier that Translucent skin was made of like a carbon alloy so that it could actually refract light and turn him invisible. So he used that knowledge to stick him with the exposed wires and electrocute him because his skin was super conductive. So it's a nice callback. It shows that you shouldn't always make fun of Jimmy Fallon because sometimes something that's said on his show could save your life. And then that's pretty much the end of the show. There's one other subplot I didn't really talk about, and I'll talk about it now, but it doesn't really fit in with the rest of the plot of the show, but it's still interesting. And it's with Homelander, the one character I haven't talked about. Should have talked more about Butcher, but you'll love him. He's hilarious. He's got so much screen presence. It's Carl Urban. I don't know what else he's in, but I know I've seen him in other stuff before. You'll recognize him as soon as you see him. He's great. He's hilarious. Definitely one of probably my favorite character and favorite actor that I've seen of the performances I've seen so far. But anyways, he's great. But I want to go back, just jump around a little bit. In the beginning of the episode, like the first scene is a getaway bank robber. And the bank robbers are plowing through cars, plowing through traffic, trying to get away. Which, I mean, I don't even know why you would rob a bank in this world full of superheroes. That just seems like asking for trouble. Doesn't seem very smart when there's people that can fly. Oh, and by the way, Homelander's a blonde-looking, all-American guy, and he's got all Superman's powers. He's impervious to bullets, he can fly, he can shoot lasers out of his eyes, so yeah. I think I might have mentioned that earlier. But Miss Maeve shows up. The car is about to run over some kids. Miss Maeve shows up, jumps in front of the car. The car explodes on her on impact because she's also, got impervious skin or whatever. And then the robbers take some kids hostage that they were about to almost run over. And then Homelander, which also, by the way, is a hilarious name. I think it's meant to evoke Homeland Security, so I don't think it's meant positively by the show's creators. But anyways, let's not get political. But Homelander shows up, he melts the gun out of one of the guy's hands, and then he throws the other guy like 300 feet in the air, and then he falls and like onto a car and just is dead, because that's what happens when you fall from 300 feet onto a car. And it's a great introduction to the world of the show, because that's like the first scene that happens after the opening credits. But what it also does is it like kind of shows that these heroes are not quite there's a word that I'm looking for. I'm going to remember it or I'm going to lose my mind. Virtuous. They're not quite the virtuous symbols of peace and justice that you think they are. There was, after he lasered the one guy's gun, he could have just grabbed, and he was close enough to grab the other guy, he could have just grabbed the other guy's gun and then punched him to knock him out or whatever. But instead he chooses to throw him 300 feet in the air and break his every bone. It was an interesting choice. It was subtle because, at this point, you don't know what's up with the story. You don't know who these guys are, but it's always very telling to me what the first, in like these superhero movies and stuff, it's always telling what the first violent encounter that a character has is. Like, going back to Deadpool, this is Deadpool 2, the one with Cable. When Cable first shows up from the future and he comes across these hillbillies and he steals their truck, he doesn't kill them, which to me was like telling that he wasn't just some psycho, evil guy, because he didn't kill the innocent people. Because what's the easiest way to show that somebody is truly evil? To have them kill an innocent person, That's like villain writing 101. That's how you show someone's ruthless. And Cable didn't do it. And then, of course, later on in the movie, you find out that, Cable was not actually a bad guy. He was from the future. He's trying to prevent the kid, I don't remember his name, My bad. Fire Fist, Fire Hand, Fireman. I don't remember. Fireboy. Whatever his name was. The I think he was also New Zealander kid. Anyways, really off topic. But yeah, and then like later on in the show or later on in the movie you find out that he's not evil. And so for me, Homelander had almost like the opposite impression on me. And my suspicions were confirmed at the end of the episode, by the way. But Homelander for me gave me the opposite indication. It's like, okay, well, he killed that guy. He killed the shit out of that guy. He killed him in like a cool looking way. He killed him in a flashy way, and he killed him unnecessarily. And to me, that says like, okay, there's something interesting about him. He's probably a little bit not okay in the head because they were so careful with how they introduced him. Flash forward later, there's a mayor. I think the mayor of Baltimore was the character. The mayor of Baltimore is talking to one of the Vought higher up ladies who like runs the corporate, whatever department. And they're talking about getting him a new superhero for Baltimore. And they're haggling over the price to contract Nubian Prince. Because, Nubian Prince is a black superhero. Baltimore is primarily a black city. So they're like, oh, he's tested well with the demographics of your city. And Caucasians also like him. He's got a 59% approval rating among Caucasians. So you should really contract him out. And they're like talking about like, I thought he was in Detroit. Yeah, but we're willing to move him to a different place. But if you don't want him, I mean, we can send him to Atlanta. It's like, it's so funny to hear like the suit talk in this first episode about like demographics and people like feeling that way about superheroes, because it's something that would inevitably happen if superheroes were real. They would totally get pulled, and those polling numbers would get broken down into demographic information. Like it's like I said, it's like taking superheroes in the modern 21st century world to their logical conclusion to a certain extent. It's great. It's really funny. And then, but he's like, he doesn't like the offer of the mayor doesn't like the offer of $300 million a year for 3 years. And so he offers her $200 million a year, but he won't tell everyone. He words it more subtly than I am, but he won't tell everyone about Compound V or Compound. I think that was what it was called, Compound V, which we don't know what that is at this point, and we still don't know by the end of the episode. So he'll do $200 million, and he blackmails her into not talking about Compound V, whatever that is. And so she sends him out, and she's done with him. And then later she calls him back and says, okay, at the end of the episode, she calls him back and says, okay, fine, you win. $230 million, and you keep Compound V a secret. And he's like, okay, thank you for singing my way, blah, blah, blah. And then he ends up getting on his private jet with his signed picture of Homelander and his kids next to him, and he gives him the picture of Homelander that's been signed, and then the kid looks out the window and he's like, "Hey, Dad, look, it's Homelander." And the dad looks out the window and he's like, "It is Homelander. What is he doing here?" And then Homelander's eyes burn red and he lights that bitch up. That airplane. Let's just say that the number of airplanes that existed after that incident was one less than it used to be, all right? That airplane's gonzo. And Homelander from up to this point seemed like the only like relatively decent one. He wasn't like, he didn't make fun of people. And one of the board meetings that the Seven had, he's like, let's stop talking about money for a second and let's talk about something more important. Black Noir? Who did you save this week? And it's like, it's so ridiculous and disarming. And I really want to give props to whatever actor plays Homelander. I'm not an actor, but I have done a very small amount of acting. And turns out, first of all, acting is hard. But I feel like it's hardest to play characters that are lying to everyone else very subtly. Like, I think of like Walter White, who, like Bryan Cranston, obviously fantastic actor, probably one of the all-time greats, but he was so good at like making it so that we, the audience, knew, partially because of our greater understanding, our omnipotence as the audience, but partly because Walter White had these tells that he would do that if you were looking for them, you could tell when he was lying. And Bryan Cranston was so good at playing him as like a liar who's, constantly lying to everyone else and lying to himself. And I got the same sort of vibe with whatever actor played Homelander. Like, he's pretending to be this virtuous, kind, Superman-esque beacon of hope and peace and justice and whatever. But you can just tell that there's something slightly off, because you're after the first scene where he just kills that guy for basically unnecessarily kills that guy. You can tell that there's something off, and so you're looking for it, and you're like, there's something off about this guy. I just don't know what it is. And then by the end of the episode, it's like, oh, he's a complete raging sociopath just like the rest of them. He's just better at hiding it than they are. And kills them, presumably to prevent them from finding out about Compound V. And that's the end of the episode. And it ends on a pretty dark note, with the plane getting cut in half by his laser eyes. And that's The Boys. That's the first episode of The Boys. Like I said at the beginning, I really liked it. I thought the humor was really well done. I thought it was funny. I thought that it had a good mix of humor and serious moments, and it was good at blending the two together with dark humor. I really liked it. I liked the characters. Even I know I said they weren't like the most mind-blowing characters I've ever seen, but I like them. I think they've got a lot of room to work with these characters. I think it's going to be interesting to see where they go. And again, I really think the show's biggest strength is the premise and the setting, like where it takes place. Super interesting corporate superhero world. It's like one of those worlds where you just want to know like every single detail about it. Like, you want to know, like, because once you start thinking about like superheroes permeating every part of popular culture, it almost becomes like, well, what do they do here? What do they do here? Are they on TV shows, or do they just do blockbuster movies? Do they do acting roles where they're not playing themselves? Like, what do they do here? What do they do here? And it's like, what happens after they retire? Do they blah, blah, blah? It just opens a lot of questions and gives the writers a lot of different directions to go and lots of different stuff to talk about. So I'm really excited. I'm going to go home probably and watch the rest of it. Maybe tonight. We'll see. I don't know how many episodes there are and how long they are. But overall, definitely recommend watching it. And then another thing that it did that was good is I've got a lot of unanswered questions. And again, you've already had the whole plot spoiled for you. And I think it's really important for shows to have unanswered questions at the end of the pilot. So I just sort of wrote down haphazardly some of the ones that I had. I'm sure there's more, but the first one is, how did Butcher know about Huey? And I spelled his name wrong. I'm going to fix that, even though nobody's ever going to look at this document, because it's going to bother me if I don't. Okay. So how did Butcher know about what happened to Robin? I mean, it was on the news, but how did he know that Huey had been offered money? How did he know where to find Huey? How did he know, like, all this other stuff? Because you also find out, by the way, that he's not actually a cop. I should have mentioned that earlier, but I didn't take super good notes this time around on the plot. But he, you find out that he's not really a Fed and that he had a fake ID or something, and that was the only reason Huey believed him at first, and so he's kind of pissed. So if he's not a Fed, how did he find out about Huey being offered money? Even if it's happened to other people, how would he know about Huey specifically? So kind of don't know where he gets his information from. Kind of curious about that. Even more basic than that, who is Butcher? What does he actually do if he's not a Fed? What's his deal? Why does he hate superheroes so much? All those types of questions. Is Translucent actually dead? He looked dead. He wasn't moving after he got electrocuted, but we don't know if he's dead. He might be in more episodes. And if he's not dead, what are they going to do with him? We know they were putting him in the trunk of their car at the end of the episode, so we don't know what happened to Translucent exactly. I'm betting he's still alive, because I think that keeps a lot more interesting doors open for him to still be alive. Does Butcher have a secret hideout? I'm assuming the answer is yes, and if so, what's it like? That should be fun. What's Starlight gonna do next to get back at the Deep, aka Aquaman, aka Sexual Predator? What's she gonna do about it? Because you could tell when she talked to Huey, she got some of her fire back, but we don't know what she's gonna do to get back at arguably one of the most powerful, literally and figuratively, men on the planet. So it'll be interesting to see what she ends up coming up with. Is she just going to beat him up, or is she going to... Because she totally could, on land, beat him in a fair fight. It would be really bad for her image, but she could do it. Or is she going to out-politic him and outmaneuver him and play the game better than him and get him fired like that? Or what's she going to do? So I'm really interested to see about that. And the last question I wrote down is, what in the ever-loving Christ is wrong with Homelander? That dude has some serious issues. I mean, he just cut the plane in half like it was nothing, and he's definitely the scariest person on the show right now, because there's very clearly something deeply wrong and unhinged about him. And so we'll have to I'm going to watch the rest of the show, but that's my review and breakdown of the pilot episode of The Boys. I thought it went pretty well. I don't know if the format's going to stay this way. I'm going to be playing around with the format for the first few episodes, because I just kind of wanted to get in and get a feel for what I was doing and just talk a little bit. My mouth is dry as all hell, though. I'm really thirsty. I should have gotten another water bottle. But that's what you can expect from the show. I'm going to be looking at pilot episodes. Sometimes it's going to be shows that I've seen. Sometimes it's going to be shows that I haven't seen. Sometimes I might even do like anime shows or kids shows or comedies, dramas, stuff I've seen, stuff I haven't seen. I'm going to do a bunch of different stuff. I'm trying not to be super constrictive in what I let myself do. Next week, I'm thinking I might do Undone, stick with the Amazon shows. Why not? But we'll see about that. It's because I'm from San Antonio. Show takes place in San Antonio. I got to cover Undone at some point. Uses the rotoscoping animation stuff, looks really cool. But yeah, we'll talk about that at some point. It might be next week. It might be later. I'm not 100% sure. And then I guess social media. I'm at Fade-In Podcast on Twitter, at Fade-In Pod on Instagram. If you want to send me an email, it's fadeinpodcast@gmail.com. I've also got a website, fadeinpodcast.com, although by the time this episode comes out, it may or may not be built out. We'll have to find out about that. And I think that's all I got. But thank you guys so much for listening to this first episode. It's only going to get better from here. You should watch The Boys. Thanks for listening.